I'm Cassandra Harper, 29, and last month I inherited $750,000 from my grandfather Thomas. The shock wasn't the money. It was sitting at my childhood dining table surrounded by unfamiliar men in suits my mother Eleanor introduced as family friends. Her smile never reached her eyes as she nodded to the notary who slid legal papers across the mahogany surface. "It's just a simple transfer, honey," she said sweetly. "The family needs this more than you do." Their faces froze when I picked up the papers, smiled, and said, "Actually, I brought something you all need to see first." If you're watching from somewhere your family respects boundaries, drop it in the comments and subscribe to see how I turned this ambush around. Growing up in suburban Massachusetts, I learned early that my mother Eleanor had a complicated relationship with money. By complicated, I mean disastrous. She was like a sieve. Money flowed through her hands without leaving a trace behind except for the shiny objects she'd acquire along the way. When I was 13, I witnessed something that would forever change how I viewed my family dynamics. I was supposed to be in bed, but I'd snuck downstairs for a glass of water when I heard my grandmother Margaret crying in the kitchen. Through the cracked door, I saw her hands trembling as she clutched a checkbook. "Eleanor, this is the 4th time this year," she said, her voice breaking. "Your father and I don't have endless resources." This was for our retirement. My mother simply waved her hand dismissively. "Mom, it's just temporary. The commission from the Lakewood property will cover everything next month." There was always a next month, always another commission, always another reason why this time would be different. My grandmother wrote the check anyway, her shoulders slumped in defeat. My mother worked as a real estate agent, which meant her income fluctuated wildly. The good months funded shopping sprees and spontaneous weekend getaways. The bad months meant past due notices and frantic calls to family members. Despite this instability, she insisted on living in an upscale neighborhood, driving luxury cars she could barely afford, and wearing designer clothes that often still had tags on them when the credit card bills came. My grandfather Thomas was different. Every Saturday morning from the time I was 10, he'd pick me up for breakfast at the local diner. Over pancakes and orange juice, he'd teach me about saving, compound interest, and the importance of living within your means. "The best things in life aren't things at all, Cassie," he'd say, using his special nickname for me. "Financial peace gives you freedom to choose your path." He never openly criticized my mother in front of me, but his disappointment was evident in the tight lines around his mouth whenever her name came up. Instead, he focused on teaching me to be different. "You're a smart girl with a good head on your shoulders," he'd tell me. "You can break the cycle." By 16, I had my first job at the local grocery store. Grandfather helped me open a savings account, and I watched with pride as my balance slowly grew. When I graduated high school with honors and acceptance to a state university for graphic design, he was the one beaming in the audience, clapping until his hands were red. College was where the financial reality really hit. My mother had promised to help with tuition. "Don't worry about it, honey. We'll figure it out when the time comes," she'd said during campus tours. But when acceptance letters arrived, she had a new excuse. The market was down, she was between big sales, she had unexpected expenses. I ended up working 2 jobs, mornings at a coffee shop and evenings at the campus library, while maintaining a full course load. My grandfather helped where he could, but he was retired on a fixed income. I still accumulated nearly $60,000 in student loans by graduation, despite my scholarships and work income. During my senior year, my grandfather's health began to decline. Congestive heart failure, the doctors said. I'd visit him at the hospital between classes and work shifts, often finding him with financial magazines spread across his hospital tray. "I've been thinking about the future, Cassie," he said during one of these visits, his voice weaker but his eyes still sharp. "About what I'll leave behind." "Grandpa, don't talk like that," I protested, arranging his pillows to help him sit up more comfortably. "No, it's important," he insisted. "I've made some arrangements." "Your mother." She'll come after anything I leave you. She always believed my money was really hers, just on loan until she needed it. I tried to brush it off, uncomfortable with the conversation, but he gripped my hand with surprising strength. Promise me you'll stand firm. What I leave you is for your future, not to fix her mistakes. I promised, never truly believing I'd need to honor it so soon or so dramatically. After graduation, I landed an entry-level position at a marketing firm in Boston. The pay wasn't great, but it was stable. I rented a tiny studio apartment, lived frugally, and made regular payments on my student loans. My grandfather would call weekly to check on me, always asking about my savings plan. 3 months ago, he passed away peacefully in his sleep. The grief was overwhelming. I'd lost not just a grandfather, but a mentor, a champion, a steady presence in my chaotic family. The reading of the will came as a shock to everyone, especially my mother. Grandfather had left me $750,000 in investments and his lake house in New Hampshire. To my mother, he left $50,000 with a note that read simply, "Eleanor, I hope you finally find contentment with what you have." At the funeral reception, my mother hugged me tightly, whispering congratulations that didn't match the calculating look in her eyes. Less than 3 hours later, as I was helping clean up at my grandmother's house, she cornered me in the kitchen. "So," she said, leaning against the counter as I washed dishes. "That was quite a surprise today." It was, I agreed, focusing on scrubbing a particularly stubborn spot on a casserole dish. "You know, the roof on my house needs major repairs. The contractor estimates about $30,000. She said it casually, as if commenting on the weather. I placed the dish in the drying rack, my hands suddenly cold despite the hot water. "I'm sorry to hear that." "Well, obviously you can help with that now," she continued. "Maybe we should sit down tomorrow and figure out how to transfer some funds." And so it began, exactly as grandfather had warned. I explained that I needed time to process everything, that there would be estate matters to handle first. But in my heart, I knew exactly what I planned to do with my inheritance: pay off my student loans, invest in a small condo instead of renting, and perhaps finally start the freelance graphic design business I'd been dreaming about. My inheritance represented something I'd never had: financial security and the freedom to make choices without constant anxiety. And I had absolutely no intention of watching it disappear into my mother's black hole of spending. The first real confrontation came 3 weeks after the funeral. I'd been dodging my mother's increasingly frequent calls, but she finally caught me with a text that hit all my guilt buttons. "Need to talk. Family emergency. Coffee at Maple Street Cafe at 2. Worried something had happened to my grandmother, I agreed to meet. When I arrived at the cafe, Eleanor was already seated at a corner table, immaculately dressed in a new designer outfit I'd never seen before. No signs of distress, no hints of emergency. "Cassie, honey." She air-kissed my cheek as I sat down. "I've ordered you a latte. They make them just how you like." "What's the emergency?" I asked, cutting to the chase. She waved dismissively. "Oh, I just needed to make sure you'd come. You've been so busy lately." Anger flared, but I tamped it down. "Mom, I told you I'd call when I had things figured out with the estate. That's actually why I wanted to talk." She leaned forward, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "I've been thinking about what your grandfather would have wanted. He made that pretty clear in his will," I pointed out. Her smile tightened. "Documents are so impersonal, sweetie. He and I had many conversations about family taking care of family." I doubted that very much, but I stayed silent. "The thing is," she continued, stirring her untouched cappuccino, "I've got some serious financial challenges right now. The house needs work, not just the roof, but the foundation too. And property taxes are due next month." I'd spent the previous evening on social media, where my mother had posted photos of her brand new Lexus with the caption, "Treating myself. Life's too short to drive boring cars." The timestamp showed she'd purchased it just days after the will reading. "What happened to your commission from the Westfield property?" I asked. "You said it was your biggest sale of the year." She blinked rapidly. Well, there were expenses. And I needed reliable transportation for showing houses. A $65,000 car was necessary for that? Her expression hardened. I work in luxury real estate, Cassandra. Image matters. Mom, I saw your vacation posts too. Booking a Mediterranean cruise doesn't scream financial emergency. That's different, she snapped. It's a business investment. Networking with high-end clients. I took a deep breath. I'm not giving you the money. Excuse me. Her voice rose enough that nearby patrons glanced over. The inheritance is already allocated. I'm paying off my student loans, investing in a small property, and saving the rest. After all I've done for you? Her eyes widened in disbelief. I raised you alone after your father left. Dad sends child support until I was 18, I corrected quietly. And you used it for your own expenses most of the time. How dare you? She slammed her hand on the table, making the cups rattle. I sacrificed everything for you. I worked 60-hour weeks to keep a roof over our heads. A roof we almost lost 3 times because you couldn't make the mortgage payments, I said, memories of foreclosure notices and midnight arguments flooding back. So this is how you repay me? By becoming a selfish, entitled little princess. Her voice had reached a pitch that guaranteed everyone in the cafe was listening now. That money should have been mine. I'm his daughter. And he chose to leave it to me, I said firmly. I'm honoring his wishes. She stood abruptly, grabbing her designer purse. Your grandfather would be ashamed of you. Family takes care of family, Cassandra. That's exactly what I'm doing, I replied. Taking care of my future so I never have to depend on family the way you've exploited them. She stormed out, leaving me with 2 untouched coffees and a cafe full of curious onlookers. I felt shaky but oddly relieved. The confrontation I dreaded was over, and I'd held my ground. Or so I thought. The next day, the calls began. First from Uncle Frank, my mother's older brother. Cassie, you need to reconsider this, he said, his normally jovial voice stern. Your mother is really struggling. It's not right for you to have all that money while she's in need. When I explained about the new car and vacation, he paused. Well, I'm sure there's an explanation. Look, just help her with the roof at least. 20 or 30,000 won't hurt your inheritance. Then came Aunt Patricia's texts, masterpieces of passive aggression. Family should support each other in difficult times. Some people seem to have forgotten that. And your grandfather would be heartbroken to see the family divided over money. My cousins Derek and Megan took sides, Derek suggesting I was being manipulated, Megan insisting I was selfish and cruel. My social media became a battleground of veiled comments and family members choosing sides. Most painfully, my grandmother Margaret left tearful voicemails. Cassie, please talk to your mother. She's very upset. Whatever disagreement you're having, family is too important to throw away. No one seemed to understand that this wasn't about money. It was about boundaries, responsibility, and respecting my grandfather's explicit wishes. Alone in my apartment that weekend, I began to doubt myself. Was I being unreasonable? Should I help with just the roof repairs? Would a one-time gift appease my mother without enabling her worst habits? I called my best friend Natalie, the only person who had seen my family dynamics up close throughout our friendship. Are you kidding me? She exclaimed when I explained my doubts. Cass, your mom is manipulating you again. Remember senior year when she borrowed your college fund for that emergency investment opportunity? You never saw a penny of that money. But the whole family is against me, I said, pacing my small living room. Because she's controlling the narrative, Natalie pointed out. They only hear her version. And trust me, in her version, she's the victim and you're the villain. I thought about my grandfather's final advice to stand firm. He'd seen this coming, had tried to prepare me for exactly this scenario. Just as I was finding my resolve again, a delivery arrived at my workplace, an elaborate flower arrangement with a card. Darling, I'm sorry about our misunderstanding. I only want what's best for you. Let's talk family dinner this Saturday at the house? Love, Mom. Her voicemail that evening was conciliatory, almost humble. Cassie, honey, I realize I came on too strong. I was emotional after losing Dad, and I handled things poorly. Can we start fresh? Just a quiet family dinner. Your grandmother will be there too. She misses you. Against my better judgment, and Natalie's explicit warning that it felt like a trap, I agreed to attend. I even baked grandfather's special apple crumble to bring as a peace offering. Before heading to my childhood home that Saturday, I made a quick call to Jordan Allen, the attorney who was helping me navigate the estate process. Just be careful, Jordan advised. Don't sign anything, no matter how small or insignificant it seems. And if you feel uncomfortable at any point, you have every right to leave. I promised to be cautious, then grabbed the apple crumble and drove to what I hoped would be a reconciliation, but suspected might be another battlefield. As I pulled into the driveway of my childhood home, alarm bells immediately started ringing in my head. There were 5 unfamiliar cars parked along the street, in addition to my mother's new Lexus, Uncle Frank's Cadillac, and Aunt Patricia's SUV. This was clearly not going to be the intimate family dinner my mother had described. I sat in my car for a moment, considering whether to drive away before anyone noticed my arrival. But that would only delay whatever confrontation was brewing. Better to face it now on my terms than be caught off guard later. I grabbed the apple crumble and approached the front door. Before I could knock, it swung open to reveal my mother, dressed formally in a black cocktail dress that seemed excessive for a family dinner. Cassie, you're finally here, she exclaimed, embracing me with unusual enthusiasm. Her perfume was overwhelming, and her smile seemed plastered on. Everyone's waiting in the dining room. The house smelled of pot roast. My favorite childhood meal, a detail that seemed calculated to lower my defenses. As I stepped into the dining room, my suspicions were confirmed. The large oak table was set with the good china we only used for holidays, and seated around it were not just family, but strangers in business attire. My grandmother Margaret sat at one end, looking uncomfortable. Uncle Frank and Aunt Patricia flanked an empty chair obviously meant for me. 3 men in suits I'd never seen before occupied the other side of the table. Cassandra, honey, my mother said with theatrical warmth, you know the family, of course. And these are our friends, Michael Bennett, Keith Williams, and Raymond Peterson. The men nodded in sequence as they were introduced. Michael, a silver-haired man with sharp eyes, stood to shake my hand. Miss Harper, pleasure to meet you. I've heard so much about you. Funny, I've heard nothing about you, I replied, setting down the apple crumble. An awkward pause followed before my mother laughed too brightly. Cassie always had a unique sense of humor. Let's all sit down, shall we? Dinner is ready. As plates of food were passed around, the conversation remained superficially pleasant, questions about my job, comments on the weather, compliments on how lovely I looked. It was all so forced, so artificial, that I barely touched my pot roast despite it being perfectly prepared. After dinner, as my mother brought coffee to the table, Uncle Frank cleared his throat and launched into what was clearly a rehearsed speech. Cassie, we're all here tonight because we care about you and the future of this family, he began, folding his hands on the table. Recent events have put us in a difficult position, and we feel it's time for a frank discussion about responsibilities and expectations. My mother picked up seamlessly where he left off. Darling, while Dad had every right to allocate his assets as he saw fit, we're concerned about your inexperience in handling such a significant sum. I'm 29 years old with a college degree and a career, I pointed out. I'm hardly a child. Of course not, interjected Michael Bennett smoothly. But estate management requires specialized knowledge. I've been the family's financial advisor for years, and I've seen how even sophisticated investors can make costly mistakes. That was the first lie. My grandfather had managed his own investments meticulously and had never mentioned a financial advisor named Michael Bennett. Raymond Peterson, the youngest of the 3 men, opened a leather portfolio. "We've prepared some documents that would protect both you and the family's interests." "What kind of documents?" I asked, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "Just a simple transfer of assets into a family trust," my mother explained casually. "You'd still benefit from the inheritance, but experienced hands would manage it appropriately." Keith Williams, who I now realized was a notary based on the stamp visible in his briefcase, nodded encouragingly. "It's quite standard in situations like this." "And who would control this trust?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "Well, I would be the primary trustee," my mother said, "with Frank as the secondary. It's the most sensible arrangement." Aunt Patricia reached across the table to squeeze my hand. "Cassie, we're family. All we want is what's best for everyone. Your grandfather wouldn't want his legacy to tear us apart." Uncle Frank nodded solemnly. "The stress of managing all this is clearly affecting you. You look exhausted, kid. Let us help carry this burden." One by one, they took turns applying pressure, subtle guilt trips, appeals to family loyalty, reminders of all my mother had supposedly sacrificed for me. My grandmother mostly stayed quiet, occasionally dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief when someone mentioned my grandfather. Finally, Raymond slid a thick document across the table. "If you'll just review and sign these papers, we can put this unfortunate tension behind us and move forward as a family." I glanced at the first page, immediately spotting phrases like revocable transfer of assets and trustees' sole discretion regarding distributions. Further down, more alarming language caught my eye. Grantor acknowledges potential lack of financial capacity and recognizes the need for supervision in financial matters. They weren't just trying to take control of my inheritance. They were attempting to establish that I was mentally unfit to manage my own affairs. My hands began to shake, not from fear but from anger. My pulse pounded in my ears, and I felt a cold sweat break out across my forehead. The room seemed to close in around me as I realized the full extent of their manipulation. "I need to use the restroom," I managed to say, standing abruptly. "I'd like a few minutes to process everything." My mother nodded magnanimously. "Of course, darling. Take all the time you need." As I locked the bathroom door behind me, I leaned against the sink and took several deep breaths. My grandfather's voice seemed to echo in my head. "They'll come after anything I leave you. Stand firm." I pulled out my phone and texted Jordan a quick summary of the situation. Her response was immediate and unequivocal. "Do not sign anything. Those clauses about lack of financial capacity could be used to challenge your competence in court. They're setting you up." A second text followed. "Is MA a one-party consent state for recording?" It was Massachusetts law allowed recording conversations if one party, me, consented. With newfound clarity, I activated my phone's recording app, splashed some cold water on my face, and prepared to return to the dining room. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about standing up to years of manipulation and establishing once and for all that I wouldn't be controlled. I returned to the table with a deliberate calmness, taking my seat and reaching for my water glass. "I'd like some time to review these documents thoroughly before signing," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "Of course," Michael Bennett replied, though his smile tightened. "Though everything is standard. We could walk you through any questions now." I took a sip of water and pretended to skim the documents again, buying time. "I noticed there's language here about my lack of financial capacity. Could you explain what that means exactly?" A flicker of discomfort passed between my mother and the attorney. "Just legal terminology," Bennett said dismissively. "Nothing to be concerned about. And this section about the trustee having sole discretion over distributions, that would mean my mother decides if and when I receive any money from my own inheritance, correct?" Uncle Frank leaned forward. "Cassie, you're getting caught up in legal jargon. The bottom line is this protects the family legacy." "You mean it gives my mother control of my grandfather's money," I corrected. "The money he specifically left to me, not to her." My mother's artificial smile was fading. "Cassandra, You're being difficult. We're trying to help you. I set the document down and looked around the table, making eye contact with each family member. They all expected me to capitulate, to be the compliant daughter I'd always been. The tension was palpable as I reached for my purse. The moment they thought I was retrieving a pen, my mother's face broke into a triumphant smile. Instead, I pulled out my phone and placed it on the table. Actually, I said with a calm I didn't entirely feel, I'd like to conference in someone to help me understand these documents better. The atmosphere in the dining room shifted instantly. My mother's triumphant smile faltered, and Michael Bennett straightened his tie nervously. That's not necessary, my mother said quickly. We have all the expertise we need right here. I ignored her, dialing Jordan's number and putting it on speaker. Jordan, I've got you on speakerphone. I'm here with my family and some gentlemen who've presented legal documents for me to sign. Jordan's clear, professional voice filled the room. Good evening, everyone. This is Jordan Allen, Ms. Harper's attorney. I understand you're proposing a transfer of assets into a family trust. The silence that followed was deafening. Uncle Frank's face flushed red, while Aunt Patricia suddenly became very interested in her coffee cup. The three men in suits exchanged alarmed glances. You brought a lawyer into this? My mother hissed, her facade of maternal concern evaporating. This is a family matter. A family matter involving legal documents declaring me financially incompetent, I replied evenly. That makes it a legal matter too. Jordan continued, her voice calm but authoritative. I've reviewed the text Ms. Harper sent me. Any document suggesting lack of financial capacity without proper evaluation by independent medical and financial professionals could potentially constitute fraud. I strongly advise against signing anything tonight. Michael Bennett recovered first, switching to damage control. We certainly didn't intend to suggest any impropriety. Perhaps we should reschedule when everyone has proper representation. Or, I said, reaching into my purse again, we could discuss why these documents were prepared in the first place. This time, I pulled out a folder, one I'd assembled over the past few weeks as a contingency plan, hoping I'd never need to use it. Inside was documented evidence of my mother's financial mismanagement spanning 2 decades. I think it's time for some transparency, I said, opening the folder. Since we're all concerned about financial capacity, let's talk about who really shouldn't be managing money. My mother's face drained of color. What is that? This, I said, laying out the first document, is a copy of your bankruptcy filing from 5 years ago. The one you told the family was just a small financial restructuring. Uncle Frank leaned forward, squinting at the paper. Bankruptcy? Eleanor, you said it was just a refinancing issue. I continued, methodically laying out more papers. These are records of loans from Grandma and Grandpa, totaling over $170,000 in the past decade alone. Loans that were never repaid. My grandmother's hand trembled as she reached for her water glass. And this, I said, placing another document on the table, is a record of grandmother's antique jewelry collection that mysteriously disappeared item by item whenever you needed quick cash. Items that you claimed were being cleaned or repaired, but were actually sold. Aunt Patricia gasped. Mother's pearl necklace? The one that was supposed to go to Megan someday. Sold to a pawn shop in 2018, I confirmed. Along with the emerald earrings and the diamond brooch from great-grandmother. My mother stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. That's enough. This is absurd. How dare you ambush me like this? Ambush? I echoed, gesturing around the room. You mean like inviting me to a family dinner that turned out to be a legal trap with 3 strangers trying to take control of my inheritance? Jordan's voice came through the speaker again. I should mention that I've advised Ms. Harper to document this entire conversation, which is legal in Massachusetts as a one-party consent state. The attorney and notary exchanged alarmed glances. The financial advisor began gathering his papers. You've been recording us? My mother shrieked. Your own family? The same family that tried to declare me financially incompetent? I countered. Yes, I have. I turned to my grandmother, whose shocked expression betrayed her complete ignorance of the plot. Grandma, did you know this dinner was arranged to pressure me into signing over Grandpa's inheritance? She shook her head slowly, tears welling in her eyes. Eleanor told me it was a reconciliation dinner. To heal the family. Uncle Frank stood up abruptly. I think we should all take a step back and cool down. Clearly there's been some miscommunication. There's been no miscommunication, I said firmly. My grandfather left his money to me because he knew exactly what would happen if he left it to Mom. The same thing that's happened to every dollar that's ever passed through her hands. It would disappear into luxury cars, designer clothes, and vacations she can't afford. You ungrateful little, my mother began, but Aunt Patricia cut her off. Eleanor, is it true about Mom's jewelry? She demanded. Did you really sell the family heirlooms? As the family's attention turned to my mother, the three professionals began a quiet retreat. Michael Bennett mumbled something about family matters to resolve as they gathered their papers and edged toward the door. Don't forget your fraudulent documents, I called after them, pushing the papers across the table. My attorney will be in touch about those lack of capacity clauses. With the outsiders gone, the family confrontation reached its boiling point. My mother, cornered and exposed, switched from denial to attack. None of you understand the pressure I've been under, she shouted. Do you have any idea what it costs to maintain our family's lifestyle? Dad was always stingy with me, always judging how I spent my money. Your money? I questioned. Or the money you borrowed and never repaid? I deserved that inheritance. She cried, her carefully applied makeup beginning to run. I'm his daughter. Not you. It should have been mine. And there was the naked truth behind all the manipulation and schemes. Not concern for my financial capability. Not worry about family legacy. Simple entitlement and greed. Mom, I said, my voice softer now, Grandpa left you $50,000. A generous gift that most people would be grateful for. Instead, you've torn the family apart trying to take what isn't yours. Uncle Frank sank back into his chair, looking deflated. Eleanor, did you really spend all that money already? The inheritance you received? My mother's silence was answer enough. She stared at the table, refusing to meet anyone's eyes. It wasn't enough, she finally whispered. It's never enough. In that moment, I saw my mother clearly, perhaps for the first time. Not as the villain in my story, but as someone trapped in patterns she couldn't escape, constantly chasing fulfillment through spending that left her emptier than before. But clarity didn't mean capitulation. I gathered my documents back into the folder. I'm leaving now, I announced. And I'm taking grandfather's inheritance with me, all of it. It's not because I don't love this family, but because I respect his wishes and the lessons he tried to teach all of us. I turned to my grandmother and hugged her gently. I'm sorry this happened, Grandma. Call me tomorrow and we'll talk, just us. As I headed for the door, my mother made one last desperate attempt. If you walk out that door with this attitude, don't bother coming back. You're choosing money over family. I paused, hand on the doorknob. No, Mom. I'm choosing boundaries over enabling. I'm choosing Grandpa's wisdom over your manipulation. When you're ready to get financial counseling and have an honest conversation, I'll be there. But not like this. Never again like this. And with that, I walked out, leaving behind the remnants of the ambush that had backfired so spectacularly. The drive home from my mother's house felt surreal. Streetlights blurred through my windshield as unexpected tears filled my eyes, not tears of defeat, but of release. 29 years of trying to please an unpleasable parent, of walking on eggshells around financial discussions, of being made to feel selfish for having boundaries, all of it crystallized in that moment of walking away. When I finally reached my apartment, I was physically and emotionally drained. I sat in my parked car for several minutes, gathering strength for whatever would come next. My phone had been buzzing continuously, texts from Uncle Frank, voicemails from my mother, a message from Aunt Patricia. I ignored them all and called Jordan instead. You did incredibly well, she assured me after I recounted the evening's events in detail. Standing your ground like that took real courage. It didn't feel like courage, I admitted. It felt like survival. Sometimes they're the same thing, she replied. Get some rest. Tomorrow we'll discuss next steps to ensure they can't try anything like this again. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my mother's face transitioning from manipulative sweetness to naked rage. I replayed my grandfather's warnings, wondering if he'd faced similar confrontations during his lifetime. By dawn, I'd made a decision. This pattern wouldn't continue. The cycle of financial manipulation in my family would end with me. Jordan arrived at my apartment the next morning with coffee and a determined expression. We sat at my tiny kitchen table reviewing options. Based on the recording and documents, we have evidence of attempted fraud, she explained. The language in those papers about your lack of financial capacity was designed to establish grounds for contesting the will through claims of your incompetence. Should we pursue legal action? I asked. Jordan considered carefully. We could, but lawsuits between family members rarely end well for anyone except the attorneys. Instead, I suggest we draft a formal cease and desist letter outlining the evidence we have. Make it clear that any further attempts to challenge your inheritance will result in legal action. And if they ignore it? Then we involve the court system, she said firmly. But let's try this first. Sometimes clear boundaries are enough to stop bad behavior. The cease and desist letter was delivered to my mother that afternoon by courier. I expected an immediate explosive response, angry calls, threats, escalation. Instead, silence descended for 3 full days. The quiet was more unnerving than confrontation would have been. On the 4th day, Uncle Frank called. His voice sounded tired, resigned. Cassie, I owe you an apology, he began, surprising me completely. I didn't know the full story about your mother's financial history, or about the jewelry. Did she admit to selling Grandma's heirlooms? I asked. Not in so many words, he sighed. But your grandmother found pawn receipts in Eleanor's desk while looking for an address book. It's been difficult around here. I'm sorry for that, I said, genuinely meaning it. But I'm not sorry for protecting myself. I understand that now, he replied. Your grandfather was right about you. You're stronger than all of us when it comes to standing your ground. After we hung up, I received an email from Raymond Peterson, the financial advisor who'd been part of the ambush. The message was brief but revealing. He was terminating his professional relationship with my mother due to ethical concerns and potential liability issues. Attached was a copy of communication showing my mother had approached him just days after the funeral, claiming I was financially irresponsible and emotionally unstable following my grandfather's death. The most surprising communication came from Aunt Patricia, who requested to meet for coffee somewhere neutral. Cautiously, I agreed. We met at a quiet cafe downtown where she arrived clutching a small velvet pouch. I found this, she said without preamble, placing it on the table between us. At a local pawn shop. The owner remembered Eleanor selling it. Inside was my grandmother's diamond brooch, the Victorian piece passed down through 5 generations of women in our family. How did you? I began. I paid to redeem it, she said simply. It wasn't cheap, but it belongs with the family. With Grandma, not in some showcase waiting to be sold to strangers. Her eyes met mine directly. I didn't know, Cassie. About any of it. The bankruptcy, the loans, the jewelry. Eleanor always presented herself as the successful one, the one who had it all together. I believed her. We all did, I acknowledged. That's how manipulation works. Patricia nodded slowly. Your grandfather knew. He tried to tell us in his own way, but we thought he was just being stingy or controlling. Now I understand he was trying to protect the family assets from being absorbed. What happens now? I asked. That depends on Eleanor, she replied. She's not speaking to anyone right now. Locked herself in her house, won't answer calls. Frank drove by yesterday and saw a moving truck, but we don't know what that means. Later that day, my grandmother called, her voice small and shaky. Cassandra, dear, I'd like to see you if you're willing. I drove to her house immediately, finding her sitting in her garden surrounded by wilting summer flowers. She looked older somehow, diminished by recent events. I failed you, she said as I sat beside her. I failed all of us by enabling your mother for so long. You loved her, I said simply. We all did what we thought was right at the time. She took my hand, her papery skin cool against mine despite the summer heat. Thomas saw it clearly. He tried to protect us from ourselves. A tear slipped down her cheek. The jewelry, it was meant for you girls, for the future. Family treasures with stories attached. Aunt Patricia found the brooch, I told her. She redeemed it from the pawn shop. A small smile flickered across her face. That's a start. Perhaps not everything is lost. It's not about the things, Grandma, I said gently. It's about the trust. About knowing the difference between helping and enabling. She nodded, squeezing my hand. Your grandfather would be so proud of you, standing firm like that. I'm proud of you too, even though it's been painful for everyone. As shadows lengthened across the garden, we talked about establishing new patterns for our family, about healthy boundaries and honest communication. For the first time, I felt like an adult in my grandmother's eyes. Not just a grandchild to be protected or indulged, but a woman with wisdom of her own to contribute. The final confrontation with my mother came unexpectedly a week later. I arrived home from work to find her sitting on the steps outside my apartment building, looking uncharacteristically subdued in jeans and a plain sweater instead of her usual designer attire. Can we talk? She asked, rising as I approached. Really talk, not fight. Warily, I invited her up, leaving the door open as we entered my small apartment. She glanced around, taking in my modest furnishings and the framed photo of my grandfather on the bookshelf. I've been evicted, she said without preamble. The house is being foreclosed. I wasn't entirely surprised, but the directness of her admission was unexpected. I'm sorry to hear that. No, you're not, she said, but without venom. And you shouldn't be. It's the consequence of my choices. She sat on the edge of my sofa, looking somehow smaller than I remembered. I sold the Lexus yesterday and canceled the cruise. Too little, too late, but a start. Where will you go? I asked. Patricia offered her guest room, temporarily, on condition that I see a financial counselor and a therapist. She laughed humorlessly. My little sister, setting terms for me. I remained standing, maintaining physical and emotional distance. And are you going to do it? Do I have a choice? She asked, then shook her head. That's the wrong question, isn't it? I've always had choices. I've just made terrible ones. For a moment, I glimpsed something I'd rarely seen in my mother, genuine self-awareness, without the veil of justification or blame. I'm not asking for money, she continued. I know that bridge is thoroughly burned. I needed to say I'm sorry. For the ambush. For trying to take what Dad left for you. For everything. I'd imagined this moment. A genuine apology from my mother, countless times over the years. In my imagination, it had always been followed by immediate forgiveness, tearful reconciliation, a fresh start. The reality was more complicated. Her words seemed sincere, but decades of manipulation couldn't be erased by a single conversation. I appreciate you saying that, I said carefully. But trust takes time to rebuild. I can't just forget what happened. She nodded, acceptance in her expression. I understand. I wouldn't either, in your position. She stood to leave, then hesitated. The financial counselor Patricia found, she said something that stuck with me. She said money problems are rarely about money. They're about trying to fill emotional needs with material things. That makes sense, I acknowledged. I've been trying to fill a hole inside me for so long, I forgot what I was even missing in the first place. She glanced at the photo of my grandfather. He tried to tell me that. I just couldn't hear it. As she headed for the door, I found myself saying, "Mom, the counseling. I think it's a good step." She paused, hand on the doorknob. Me too. Maybe someday we can have coffee again. Just coffee, no agenda. Maybe, I agreed. One step at a time. After she left, I sat in my quiet apartment, processing what had just occurred. It wasn't the Hollywood ending where all was forgiven and forgotten. It was messy, tentative, and uncertain, but it was honest, perhaps for the first time in our relationship. I called Jordan later that evening to update her on this unexpected development. "People can change," she said thoughtfully. "But it usually takes a significant catalyst, like hitting rock bottom. Do you think I should trust this new version of her?" I asked. "Trust is earned incrementally," Jordan replied. "If she's serious about changing, she'll understand that you need to see consistent evidence over time. Your boundaries aren't punishment. They're protection while you both figure out what a healthier relationship might look like." That night, I looked at my grandfather's photo before going to bed. "You were right," I told him softly. "About everything." I stood firm, just like you asked. I just wish it hadn't hurt so many people along the way. In the silence of my apartment, I could almost hear his gentle reply, "The truth often hurts at first, Cassie. But it's the only foundation worth building on." The week after my mother's unexpected visit was strangely quiet. No dramatic phone calls, no flying monkeys sent to pressure me, no emotional manipulation tactics. The silence felt both refreshing and unsettling, like the peculiar stillness before a storm. That Friday, I received a text from Uncle Frank. "Eleanor moved in with Patricia yesterday. Clean break from the house. Movers took care of everything. She's actually following through with counseling. Thought you should know." I wasn't sure how to feel about this development. Part of me was skeptical. I'd seen my mother make grand gestures of change before, only to revert to old patterns once the crisis passed. Another part wondered if rock bottom might finally have been enough to catalyze real transformation. My cautious neutrality was shattered that weekend when distant relatives and family friends began contacting me. My mother, it seemed, had launched a social media campaign painting herself as the victim of her ungrateful daughter who had stolen her rightful inheritance and left her homeless. "Is it true you're making your mother live in a shelter while you sit on a fortune?" demanded my second cousin Darlene, who I hadn't spoken to in at least 5 years. "Your grandfather would be ashamed," wrote my mother's friend Gail. Family takes care of family. The messages came in waves, each one more outraged than the last, all based on my mother's carefully crafted narrative that omitted the attempted legal manipulation, the bankruptcy, the sold heirlooms, and her own inheritance that had disappeared within weeks. I drafted and deleted a dozen responses before deciding that engaging would only fuel the drama. Instead, I temporarily deactivated my social media accounts and focused on moving forward with my own plans. Jordan helped me navigate the estate process, ensuring all legal requirements were properly fulfilled. With her guidance, I paid off my student loans in full $62 for $79.83, a number that had haunted my financial statements for years. The day I received confirmation that the balance was zero, I sat on my couch and cried from sheer relief. With that burden lifted, I began looking for a modest condo in a neighborhood just outside downtown Boston. Nothing extravagant, but something that would be mine, that couldn't be taken away by a landlord's whim or market fluctuations. I also invested in quality equipment for my long-dreamed-of freelance graphic design business, a professional-grade computer, software, and a dedicated workspace in my apartment. The majority of the inheritance went into diversified investments, following a conservative plan Jordan had helped me develop. "This is what your grandfather would have wanted," she assured me. Growth with protection, thinking decades ahead. 3 weeks after the confrontation, an unexpected knock at my door revealed my grandmother Margaret standing in the hallway, clutching her purse nervously. "I hope I'm not intruding," she said hesitantly. I should have called first. I welcomed her in, quickly clearing books from my small sofa to make space for her to sit. "Can I get you some tea, Grandma?" "That would be lovely, dear." As I prepared the tea, she looked around my apartment with interest. "It's small, but you've made it very homey. Very you." "It's temporary," I explained, bringing 2 steaming mugs to the coffee table. "I'm looking at condos, actually. Something I can own instead of rent." She nodded approvingly. "Your grandfather would think that's sensible." We sipped our tea in companionable silence for a moment before she set her mug down decisively. "I've come about Eleanor," she said, "and to return something that belongs to you." From her purse, she withdrew a small wooden box I recognized immediately. Grandfather's collection of vintage fountain pens. He'd shown them to me many times, explaining the history and craftsmanship of each one. "He wanted you to have these," she said, placing the box in my hands. "He told me before he passed, but they weren't mentioned specifically in the will." With everything that happened, I forgot until I was cleaning yesterday. I opened the box reverently, running my fingers over the smooth barrels of pens that had written countless letters, signed important documents, and been cared for by my grandfather's steady hands. "Thank you," I whispered, emotion tightening my throat. "Now, about your mother," Grandma continued, her voice gaining strength. "She's staying with Patricia, as you may know. I've been visiting regularly and I think this time might be different." I closed the pen box carefully. "Different how?" "She's attending the financial counseling sessions. Actually participating, not just going through the motions. The counselor has her on a strict budget for the first time in her life." A small smile touched my grandmother's lips. She had quite a shock when she realized how much she was spending on coffee shops alone each month. "That's encouraging," I said cautiously. "I'm not suggesting you rush to reconcile," my grandmother clarified. "Trust takes time to rebuild, especially after what she tried to do. I just thought you should know there might be reason for cautious hope." Before leaving, she hugged me tightly. "I'm proud of you, Cassandra. Standing up for yourself was brave. Many people never learn to do that, especially with family." Her visit left me contemplative. While I wasn't ready to re-establish contact with my mother, knowing she was taking concrete steps toward change felt like a weight lifting that I hadn't realized I was carrying. The following weekend, I visited the lake house for the first time since inheriting it. The small cabin sat on 3 acres of waterfront property in New Hampshire, about 2 hours from Boston. As I unlocked the door, memories flooded back. Summer weekends fishing with grandfather, autumn bonfires, winter afternoons reading by the stone fireplace while snow fell outside. The cabin was dusty but otherwise well-maintained. I spent the day opening windows, wiping down surfaces, and reconnecting with the place that had always felt more like home than any other. Sitting on the dock as sunset painted the lake in golds and purples, I felt my grandfather's presence strongly. "I'm doing it, Grandpa," I said aloud to the quiet water. "Standing firm, just like you taught me." Upon returning to Boston, I scheduled my first therapy session, something I'd been considering for years, but had always found reasons to postpone. Dr. Amelia Taylor specialized in family dynamics and financial trauma, a combination that seemed tailor-made for my situation. "Many people don't realize that money issues are rarely just about money," she explained during our first session, echoing the insight my mother had shared. "They're about security, control, self-worth, and often patterns that stretch back generations." Over the next few weeks, Dr. Taylor helped me recognize how my family's dysfunctional approach to finances had shaped my own relationship with money, my excessive frugality, anxiety about spending on myself, and tendency to equate financial support with love. "Your grandfather tried to break the pattern," she observed. "He saw what was happening and tried to give you both financial resources and the wisdom to use them well. That's a powerful legacy." Meanwhile, the practicalities of my new financial reality continued to unfold. I closed on a modest two-bedroom condo in a diverse neighborhood with good public transportation access. Nothing ostentatious, but with enough space for a proper home office to support my freelance work. My first independent design client came through a referral from a colleague at my day job, then another. By month 3 after the inheritance, I had enough freelance work to consider reducing my full-time position to part-time. Throughout this transition period, I maintained cautious distance from my mother. Uncle Frank and Aunt Patricia provided occasional updates, Eleanor selling most of her designer clothes on consignment sites, attending both financial and emotional counseling sessions, taking a job as an office manager for a small real estate firm rather than continuing as an agent with unpredictable commission income. For months after the confrontation, I received a handwritten letter from my mother. Not an email or text that could be dashed off impulsively, but a carefully composed letter on simple stationery. "I'm not writing to ask for anything," it began. "Just to say that I'm beginning to understand how my behavior affected you, not just recently but throughout your life. The counseling is difficult. Facing decades of poor choices isn't easy, but it's necessary. I'm learning that my compulsive spending was trying to fill an emptiness that no amount of things could satisfy. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know I'm doing the work to change, whether or not we ever rebuild our relationship." It wasn't a perfect letter. Hints of her old self-centered perspective still showed through in places, but it felt more genuine than any communication I'd received from her in years. I shared it with Dr. Taylor in our next session. "What do you want to do with this?" she asked after reading it carefully. "I don't know," I admitted. "Part of me wants to believe she's changing. Another part is waiting for the manipulation angle to reveal itself." "Both responses make sense given your history," she acknowledged. "There's no rush to decide. You can take time to observe her actions, which will tell you more than her words ever could." In the end, I sent a brief but cordial response, acknowledging her efforts without making promises about our future relationship. It was a small step, but an honest one. As autumn turned to winter, I found myself creating new traditions and connections. I invited Natalie and a few close friends to the lake house for Thanksgiving weekend. I joined a financial literacy group that met monthly to discuss responsible investing and charitable giving. I volunteered to teach a basic design workshop at a community center serving low-income teens. Slowly, I was building a life that honored my grandfather's legacy while creating my own path forward, a life defined by thoughtful choices rather than reactions to family chaos. 6 months after the inheritance that had changed everything, I realized something profound while walking along the Boston waterfront one crisp December morning. I was no longer consumed by anger or resentment toward my mother. The emotions hadn't disappeared, but they'd lost their power to dictate my thoughts and decisions. Whatever happened with Eleanor in the future, whether she maintained her new path or reverted to old patterns, I had broken free of the destructive cycle that had defined our family for generations. The inheritance hadn't just given me financial security, it had catalyzed a different kind of freedom altogether. That evening, I called my grandmother to invite her to the lake house for the weekend. "I'm restoring Grandpa's old fishing boat," I told her. "I thought you might like to see it." "He would love that you're taking care of it," she said, her voice warm with approval. "And so do I." As I hung up, I glanced at my grandfather's photo on the bookshelf. "The money was just money, Grandpa," I said softly. "But the lessons, those were the real inheritance." 6 months became a year. Winter thawed into spring, spring blossomed into summer, and I found myself celebrating the 1-year anniversary of my inheritance with a quiet dinner at the lake house. Grandmother Margaret joined me, along with Natalie and Jordan, who had become friends as well as my attorney through this journey. My condo in Boston had become truly home, neutral colors with splashes of vibrant art, comfortable furniture that welcomed rather than impressed, and a proper office setup that supported my now thriving freelance business. I'd transitioned to part-time at my marketing job 3 months prior, giving me the flexibility to pursue more meaningful design projects. A toast, Natalie proposed, raising her glass as we sat on the deck overlooking the sunset-painted lake. To Cassandra, who took an inheritance and built a legacy. To standing firm, Jordan added with a knowing smile. To Thomas, my grandmother said softly, who saw clearer than any of us. I touched my glass to theirs, throat tight with emotion. To choices that break cycles. Later, after Natalie and Jordan had driven back to the city, I sat with my grandmother by the fire pit, sharing comfortable silence as stars appeared overhead. I've been thinking about family legacies, I said finally. Not just money, but the patterns we pass down. She nodded, her face gentle in the firelight. Some worth keeping, others worth leaving behind. I've decided to establish a scholarship, I told her. The Thomas Harper Financial Literacy Scholarship for first-generation college students. Something small to start, maybe 2 students per year, but with room to grow. Tears glistened in her eyes. He would be honored by that. Truly honored. The application will include an essay about healthy financial habits, I continued. And recipients will participate in financial literacy workshops throughout their college years. Breaking cycles beyond just our family, she observed. That's beautiful, Cassandra. Financial literacy had become something of a mission for me over the past year. Beyond establishing the scholarship, I'd begun teaching monthly workshops at the community center, helping young adults understand credit, budgeting, investing, and the emotional aspects of money management. We don't talk about money honestly in this culture, I'd tell my students. We're taught it's impolite to discuss, which leaves people isolated with financial problems and prevents us from learning from each other's experiences. The workshops had become increasingly popular, with participants ranging from teenagers to retirees looking to better understand their finances. Teaching others reinforced my own learning and helped transform painful family experiences into valuable lessons for others. My relationship with my mother had evolved into something I'd never anticipated. Not close, but not estranged either. After 8 months of consistent counseling and demonstrated financial responsibility, Eleanor had moved into her own small apartment. She'd remained at the office manager job, embracing the stability of regular paychecks over the boom and bust cycle of real estate commissions. We met occasionally for coffee, our conversations tentative but increasingly authentic. She never asked for money again, and I began to appreciate the effort this restraint required from someone who had spent decades viewing family as financial resources to be tapped. During one such meeting, she surprised me by pulling out a small notebook. My financial counselor has me track every expenditure, she explained, showing me the neat columns of figures. It was embarrassing at first, seeing it all written down, but now it's actually empowering. I know exactly where my money goes. That's really great, Mom, I said, genuinely impressed by her commitment. I'm saving for a trip, she added with uncharacteristic shyness. Not a luxury cruise or anything extravagant. Just a weekend at a B&B in Vermont this fall. Properly budgeted, fully funded before I go. It was such a small thing by ordinary standards, but for Eleanor Harper, it represented a seismic shift in approach, planning ahead, living within means, finding joy in simple pleasures rather than status symbols. My Uncle Frank and I had also found a new understanding. After the initial confrontation, he'd apologized sincerely for his role in the ambush and had made efforts to rebuild trust through transparency and respect for my boundaries. Your grandfather tried to talk to me about Eleanor's financial issues for years, he admitted during a visit to the lake house. I dismissed him as being stingy or controlling. Now I see he was trying to protect all of us from the consequences of enabling her. Together, Frank and I had established a small trust for my grandmother Margaret, ensuring her needs would be met regardless of any future family dynamics. It was the kind of practical, forward-thinking arrangement my grandfather would have approved. Aunt Patricia had emerged as an unexpected ally throughout the year. After redeeming the family brooch from the pawn shop, she'd worked tirelessly to recover other family heirlooms that had been sold off. "It's not about the monetary value," she explained as she presented my grandmother with her long-lost sapphire ring, found in an estate sale 2 counties away. "It's about preserving the stories attached to these pieces, the family history they represent." The lake house itself had undergone a gentle restoration under my care. Not modernization or expansion, but a respectful refreshing of what already existed. New paint in the original colors, careful repairs to the stone fireplace, restoration of my grandfather's old wooden boat. I'd maintained his workshop exactly as he left it, tools hanging in their designated spots, the scent of wood and varnish preserved like a time capsule. During one weekend of repairs, I discovered a hidden compartment in his desk containing a journal addressed to me. "For Cassie, when the time is right," read the envelope. Inside, I found not only financial advice, but his reflections on our family patterns, his regrets about enabling Eleanor for too long, and his hopes for how I might forge a different path. "Money itself is neutral," he'd written in his precise handwriting. "It's neither good nor evil. It simply amplifies what's already there. Generosity becomes more generous, addiction becomes more destructive, wisdom becomes more impactful. I'm leaving you this inheritance not because you need money to be complete, but because I trust you to use it as a tool for building a meaningful life rather than as a substitute for one." Those words had become something of a personal manifesto, guiding my decisions about spending, saving, investing, and giving. I'd had them framed, hanging unobtrusively in my home office as a daily reminder. The inheritance had allowed me to establish the financial security my grandfather had always wanted for me, but the greater gift had been the catalyst for healing, both personal and familial. I'd learned that sometimes standing firm was an act of love, not just for myself, but for others caught in destructive patterns. Through therapy, I'd begun to understand that my mother's compulsive spending wasn't simply selfishness, but a misguided attempt to fill emotional voids with material possessions. This didn't excuse her manipulation or entitlement, but it helped me view her with compassion rather than resentment. Dr. Taylor had helped me recognize that while forgiveness was valuable, it didn't necessarily mean forgetting or removing healthy boundaries. "Forgiveness is something you do for yourself," she explained. "It's releasing the power that anger has over you. Boundaries are something you maintain for yourself. They're the lessons you take from experience." As the 1-year mark of the inheritance passed, I found myself in a place of unexpected peace. The monthly family dinners we'd established, sometimes at my condo, sometimes at the lake house, had become opportunities for new traditions and gradual healing. During one such dinner, my mother had arrived with a small gift box. "It's not your birthday," she said awkwardly, "but I saw this and thought of you." Inside was a simple silver bookmark engraved with the words, "The best inheritance a parent can give their children is a few minutes of their time each day." "It reminded me of what Dad tried to give you," she said quietly. "What I should have given you more of." It wasn't a dramatic Hollywood reconciliation moment. We didn't fall into each other's arms sobbing or declare all past hurts healed. But it was honest, and in that honesty lay the possibility of a healthier relationship moving forward. The greatest lesson of the past year had been learning to distinguish between family as a concept and family as individuals. I discovered that honoring family didn't mean enabling destructive patterns or sacrificing my own well-being on the altar of familial obligation. Rather, it meant holding space for growth while maintaining healthy boundaries. My grandfather's inheritance had given me financial security, yes. But the true gift had been the permission to break cycles, to establish boundaries, to define family on my own terms. The money itself was finite. These lessons would serve me, and perhaps future generations, indefinitely. As I sat on the dock that evening after my guests had gone, watching moonlight shimmer across the lake's surface, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. not just for the inheritance that had changed my material circumstances, but for the greater inheritance of wisdom, courage, and self-respect that my grandfather had cultivated in me over years of Saturday morning pancakes and fishing lessons. "I kept my promise, Grandpa," I whispered to the night air. I stood firm. And in standing firm, I found something I never expected: freedom, not just from financial stress, but from the weight of dysfunctional patterns that have shaped our family for generations. The water lapped gently against the shore, a soothing rhythm like applause from beyond. Whatever challenges the future held, I would face them not from a place of reaction or fear, but from a foundation of thoughtful choice and hard-won wisdom. That, I realized, was the inheritance that mattered most. Have you ever had to stand firm against family pressure to protect your own future? Do you think it's possible for people to truly change deep-seated patterns like my mother began to? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit like and subscribe for more stories about family dynamics, personal growth, and finding your own path. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself and others is to establish clear boundaries. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next video.